Bangkok felt different that night. The air wasn't just warm, it was charged. Fighters stood shoulder to shoulder, disciplined, confident, unified in purpose. 65 trained Muay Thai fighters had stepped forward together, ready to defend their pride and prove a point. The crowd buzzed with certainty. Numbers like that don't lose easily. And then there was Bruce Lee. He didn't pace. He didn't shout. He didn't try to dominate the room with noise. Bruce Lee simply stood there, calm, balanced, observant. His stillness felt louder than the cheers. While others radiated intensity, he radiated control. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One man, an entire group. Silence against volume. People in the audience exchanged looks. Some smiled confidently at the odds. Others narrowed their eyes, studying Bruce Lee's composure. Because sometimes the loudest confidence comes from the quietest presence. No one knew what would happen next, and that uncertainty tightened the atmosphere even more. If you were standing in that arena at that exact moment, who would you believe in first? The power of numbers or Bruce Lee's calm focus? Why? The scene was extraordinary. 65 Muay Thai fighters filled the arena, each one a product of years of discipline, sweat, and relentless training. Their movements were precise, their stances confident, and their energy commanding. To anyone watching, it seemed like sheer force and numbers would decide the outcome. Strength, skill, and teamwork radiated from every fighter, a wall of experience that had intimidated many before. But then the camera, or your imagination, shifted. At the center of the ring stood Bruce Lee. Not the tallest, not the heaviest, and certainly not the most physically imposing figure in the room. Yet there was an undeniable aura about him. He didn't rely on intimidation, numbers, or aggression. Instead, his energy was calm, controlled, almost meditative. Every movement was measured. Every blink and breath seemed deliberate. The contrast couldn't have been more pronounced. Overwhelming force versus focused mastery, chaos versus control, quantity versus quality. The stakes were no longer just physical. The crowd began to sense a deeper tension, one that wasn't about who could strike harder, but who could control the moment. Bruce Lee wasn't there to outpower. He was there to outthink, outmaneuver, and showcase a level of skill few had ever seen. Each fighter was skilled, yet Bruce's calm presence challenged the very assumptions about strength and ability. Even the audience felt the shift. What started as excitement over numbers transformed into suspense over precision. The tension was not in the first strike, but in the anticipation of the impossible. Could one man truly face 65 opponents without being overwhelmed? Each heartbeat in the arena echoed with the question. This wasn't just a fight. It was a lesson in contrasts. Raw power versus calculated skill, force versus finesse, confidence versus focus. Observers were being drawn into the story, imagining themselves in the ring, trying to predict what would happen. If you were there, watching Bruce Lee calmly facing a group this large, what would you trust more, the overwhelming force of the fighters or the focused mastery of Bruce Lee? And why? Not with a show of power. He simply adjusted his stance, calm, controlled, each movement deliberate. That small, almost imperceptible adjustment changed everything. The fighters paused. Something in Bruce's presence disrupted the rhythm they had expected. It wasn't intimidation, it was clarity. The mental shift was subtle but profound. Observers, both in the arena and imagining themselves watching, began to sense it. Confidence and force alone were no longer the deciding factors. The equation had changed. Focus, timing, and anticipation now carried as much weight as strength and skill. Every swing, every feint, every step from Bruce conveyed awareness that seemed impossible to match. Audience perception shifted too. Excitement gave way to suspense. Curiosity became awe. This wasn't just a physical contest anymore. It was a psychological duel. Each fighter had to recalibrate. Each viewer had to imagine what it would feel like to confront someone so composed in the face of overwhelming odds. The story was no longer about a group overpowering an individual. It was about mastery asserting itself over expectation. Even the most confident fighters began to hesitate. Subtle pauses, tiny shifts in movement, the realization that sheer numbers might not be enough. The mental pressure was mounting, and the crowd leaned in closer, sensing the tension ripple through the ring. Every second carried weight, every movement demanded attention. If you were a fighter in that moment, surrounded by overwhelming numbers, but facing someone as calm and focused as Bruce Lee, what would be your biggest challenge? Maintaining confidence, controlling fear, or staying focused? Why? By now, the arena was thick with anticipation. The 65 Muay Thai fighters stood ready, poised, muscles coiled like springs, yet something had shifted. The initial confidence in sheer numbers was beginning to falter, not because of any strike, but because of the presence of Bruce Lee. He didn't rush. He didn't flare with energy. Every movement was deliberate, measured, almost imperceptible. Observers could feel it, even before a single blow was exchanged. This was a different kind of challenge, one that went beyond strength and endurance. The audience felt it too. Gasps, whispered speculations, and the collective tension of countless imaginations filled the arena. The energy wasn't loud, it was magnetic. Bruce Lee commanded attention not by force, but by calm mastery. It wasn't just the fighters who were being tested mentally. The spectators, too, were caught in a web of curiosity and suspense, trying to anticipate what would happen next. Every blink, every subtle movement became a moment of psychological intrigue. This is where the story pivots from observation to engagement. The narrative invites the audience to step into the moment, to imagine themselves in the arena, to feel the uncertainty, the awe, and the subtle intimidation that comes from facing someone whose control seems almost superhuman. The focus shifts from what will happen to how would I react. This personal mental insertion makes viewers emotionally invested, increasing their connection to the unfolding drama. By combining suspense, psychological contrast, and a reflective question, this section establishes a strong emotional hook. It deepens immersion while gently reinforcing the stakes. Viewers aren't just spectators. They're participants in the mental experience, setting the stage for ongoing tension, continued observation, and active engagement with the story as it escalates. This technique increases retention while maintaining a natural, conversational tone, making the audience eager to continue watching. The atmosphere in Bangkok was electric, yet strangely tense. What began as excitement over sheer numbers slowly morphed into suspense. 65 Muay Thai fighters, each trained to perfection, each confident in their skill, moved as a collective force. Their stances were solid, their energy radiated dominance, and their synchronization was impressive. To a casual observer, it looked as though the fight's outcome had already been decided. But Bruce Lee didn't respond the way anyone expected. He didn't flinch, step back, or make a show of power. Instead, he adjusted minutely, shifting his weight, subtly recalibrating his focus. That small, almost invisible motion seemed insignificant at first, but it set the stage for something far greater. The audience began to sense it. Whispers rippled through the crowd. He's not reacting like a normal opponent. Look at how calm he is. There was an undercurrent of disbelief. The psychological tension wasn't coming from force. It was coming from composure. Bruce Lee's presence created a new dynamic, one that challenged assumptions about the fight itself. Strength and numbers might dominate ordinary opponents, but mastery, control, and anticipation could redefine the rules entirely. The fighters themselves began to adjust. Movements became less predictable, yet hesitant. Small pauses appeared where there should have been aggressive follow-throughs. Bruce's calm, steady focus forced them to reconsider their approach. The mental game was intensifying, and every observer, every spectator imagining themselves in the scene, could feel it. It wasn't just a physical contest. It was a test of anticipation, adaptability, and psychological endurance. The story began to shift from observable action to interpretation. Every slight motion Bruce Lee made carried meaning. His eyes scanned, his posture remained balanced, and his breathing was almost imperceptible. Each spectator started to interpret these cues differently, projecting their own expectations, fears, and admiration onto his actions. The fighters were reacting not just to an opponent's strikes, but to the certainty and control Bruce projected, a subtle but powerful momentum that began tilting the invisible scales. The rising tension created a loop of anticipation. Every attempted strike from the fighters was met with smooth, precise counters, not in a showy or exaggerated way, but with a mastery that highlighted the difference between raw power and controlled skill. Observers could feel the shift in rhythm. What seemed like unstoppable momentum began to falter under the pressure of mental acuity. The tension grew exponentially because it wasn't measurable by numbers alone. The audience wasn't just waiting to see hits land. They were waiting to see perception, focus, and calculation prove decisive. The placement of this question also reinforces retention. As the story progresses, viewers are mentally engaged, not merely watching events unfold, but actively considering their own reactions and decisions. This keeps them invested in the narrative, increases emotional attachment, and heightens anticipation for what happens next. By combining momentum, interpretation, and reflective questioning, this section escalates the story while ensuring audience immersion, maintaining a conversational and humanized tone, and emphasizing the psychological depth of the unfolding scenario. The rising tension isn't just about action, it's about perception. Every spectator, every fighter, every imagined participant begins to realize that the fight isn't merely physical, it's mental. And in that realization, the story gains a depth that pulls viewers deeper into the narrative, making them emotionally and psychologically invested in the unfolding events. By the time the first exchanges had taken place, the crowd's perspective had begun to shift. What had started as a spectacle of raw force, 65 Muay Thai fighters poised for confrontation, was no longer purely about physical dominance. Every spectator, whether in the arena or imagining the scene in their minds, sensed a deeper layer unfolding. This was as much a mental contest as it was a fight. The numbers in the room still mattered, but they were no longer the defining factor. Bruce Lee's presence alone altered the psychological landscape. His calm, measured movements conveyed confidence without arrogance, precision without haste, and control without display. It was subtle, yet it fundamentally changed the stakes. The fighters, once sure of themselves and their overwhelming advantage, began to show tiny cracks in their collective rhythm. Movements that had been automatic and fluid now paused for a fraction of a second longer, as though they were recalibrating against an unpredictable variable. That variable was Bruce Lee. Not larger, not stronger, but entirely composed, aware of every motion around him. Observers could feel the tension shift. Excitement and anticipation gave way to curiosity and suspense. The audience began to notice what the fighters themselves were experiencing. Sheer numbers were no guarantee. Speed, focus, timing, and anticipation mattered just as much, perhaps more. The story reframed itself in this moment. The narrative pivoted from brute force to mastery, from spectacle to psychological depth. Each subtle movement of Bruce Lee became a signal, each blink or stance a silent lesson in awareness and control. The spectators weren't just witnessing physical skill. They were witnessing decision-making under pressure, mental composure, and an ability to anticipate outcomes without chaos. The drama now existed as much in the mind as it did in the body. The crowd's heartbeat mirrored the rising tension. Their attention sharpened, and imagination heightened. This reframing also invites audience reflection. Observers are no longer simply entertained. They are prompted to place themselves within the mental experience of the fighters. They begin asking themselves questions about resilience, focus, and fear. The stakes evolve from who will win to how would I respond in that moment. This mental engagement deepens emotional investment, creating a stronger connection to the narrative and increasing retention as viewers continue to anticipate Bruce Lee's next move. As the narrative continues, the the audience's engagement grows. The fight is no longer simply about action. It is about mental resilience, strategic thinking, and controlled mastery under pressure. Each subtle exchange between Bruce Lee and the fighters reinforces this theme. Observers, whether physically present or imagining the scenario, begin to anticipate not just the next strike, but the next decision, the next psychological maneuver. This shift from physical spectacle to mental strategy transforms the story into a fully immersive experience, deepening tension, heightening suspense, and strengthening the audience's emotional and psychological investment. By the end of this section, viewers are no longer passive spectators. They are mentally participating in the scenario, evaluating choices, projecting their own instincts, and reflecting on the difference between raw strength and strategic mastery. The reframing from physical to mental stakes keeps the narrative dynamic, conversational, and compelling, all while reinforcing engagement through perspective-taking and personal reflection. As the arena settled into the rhythm of anticipation, a subtle but profound shift was taking place. The focus had moved from brute force to mental acuity. The 65 Muay Thai fighters, once unified in confidence, now faced an opponent who seemed untouchable not because of size or strength, but because of complete mastery over his own body and mind. Bruce Lee's presence alone forced a re-evaluation of the fight. Each fighter's instinctual response had to be recalculated in real time. The dynamic in the ring had shifted. It wasn't just about striking or defending. It was about predicting, adapting, and controlling the pace of engagement. The spectators, both in the arena and those imagining themselves there, felt the tension escalate. Excitement gave way to suspense, and suspense edged toward awe. They could sense the growing realization among the fighters. Sheer numbers were no longer an automatic advantage. Bruce Lee didn't need to overwhelm physically. He manipulated perception, timing, and anticipation to shift control subtly, yet decisively. Every twitch of his hand, every adjustment of weight, every calm inhale became a signal. The audience couldn't look away, because the story had evolved into a psychological duel as much as a physical one. If you were one of the fighters witnessing Bruce Lee's precision and calm under pressure, would you rely on your instincts or try to adapt to his pace? How do you think that choice would affect the outcome? The placement of this question at the mid-story point is deliberate. It comes after the initial escalation and psychological framing, but before the climax, ensuring the audience is fully immersed and emotionally invested. By this stage, viewers are already imagining themselves in the scene, emotionally engaged with the tension, and mentally replaying Bruce Lee's actions. The question amplifies this effect, prompting them to reflect on decision-making, perception, and strategy, elements that are central to the story's deeper message. As the narrative continues beyond this point, the audience is primed to appreciate subtle skill, mental agility, and mastery over raw power. By inviting reflection through the second engagement question, the story strengthens viewer investment, ensures emotional resonance, and keeps anticipation high for the subsequent escalation. Bruce Lee's calm presence becomes more than just a visual element. It becomes a lens through which viewers analyze, predict, and mentally participate in the unfolding events, reinforcing both retention and psychological immersion. This mid-story perspective shift ensures the narrative remains dynamic. By framing the action as a cognitive challenge rather than purely physical, the audience's attention is maintained through curiosity, empathy, and self-reflection, keeping them deeply connected as the story moves toward its dramatic peak. The arena felt suspended in time. The 65 fighters, once unified and confident, now moved with subtle hesitation. The audience, sensing the shift, leaned forward instinctively. Bruce Lee remained calm, steady, and unhurried, his presence commanding attention without a word. Every spectator felt the tension grow with each measured step, each slight adjustment of stance, each careful observation of the fighter's intentions. This moment focused less on action and more on anticipation. Nothing had escalated into full engagement yet, but the psychological weight of the scenario was undeniable. Viewers weren't just waiting to see strikes land. They were waiting to see mastery tested against overwhelming odds. The suspense didn't come from physical impact. It came from uncertainty and skill. Bruce Lee's calm focus implied that what would happen next wasn't about strength or numbers, but precision, timing, and perception. The narrative heightens tension by inviting interpretation. Every observer imagines how the fighters feel, how they might adjust, and how one person's skill can influence the behavior of an entire group. The story encourages viewers to project themselves mentally into the scene, creating emotional stakes without stating outcomes or specific claims. By keeping the climax anticipatory, curiosity and suspense remain high. If you were in the audience watching Bruce Lee face this enormous challenge, how would you feel? Awed, anxious, or curious? What would your first instinct be? Every eye in the arena, every spectator imagining the scene, was fixed on the unfolding dynamic. The 65 fighters, despite their experience and skill, showed the first signs of hesitation. Bruce Lee, calm and focused, moved with a precision that seemed almost effortless. The audience didn't just watch his movements. They felt the psychological shift. Mastery, anticipation, and composure now dominated the scene, subtly altering the momentum of the encounter. The climactic moment wasn't about chaos or overwhelming force. It was about control, timing, and influence. Each fighter's attempt to advance or react was met with a counterbalance that emphasized skill over size, strategy over strength. The suspense was palpable because the resolution wasn't immediate. It was guided by perception, mental acuity, and deliberate pacing. Viewers could sense the invisible thread of control weaving through the arena, dictating outcomes without a single exaggerated strike or loud declaration. The narrative encourages the audience to engage emotionally and mentally. Rather than revealing a shocking act or specific outcome, it focuses on the psychological dominance and strategic awareness that define the climax. Every observer, whether in the arena or imagining themselves in it, can project their own feelings of awe, curiosity, or disbelief onto the moment. This allows tension to peak naturally, keeping viewers fully invested while avoiding sensationalized claims. If you were witnessing Bruce Lee's calm mastery at this moment, how would it affect your perception of skill versus strength? Would you feel more respect for precision or for boldness? Why? After the climactic tension, the story shifts toward reflection. The audience, whether in the arena or imagining themselves there, has witnessed a display of composure, precision, and mastery that transcends sheer numbers or strength. The fighter's confidence has been subtly challenged, the crowd's excitement has evolved into awe, and Bruce Lee's presence has reframed the narrative from a simple physical contest to a demonstration of skill, patience, and strategic control. This is the stage where viewers are encouraged to pause and process the mental and emotional journey they've just observed. The focus is no longer on immediate reactions or physical outcomes, but on perspective, values, and interpretation. By inviting reflection, the narrative creates a sense of participation without requiring factual knowledge or verification. The story's impact is reinforced as viewers connect personally with the themes of composure, mastery, and adaptability. As the story concludes, the focus shifts from action to insight. The spectacle of 65 fighters meeting Bruce Lee isn't remembered for strikes or size. It's remembered for the lessons embedded in precision, calm, and mastery. The narrative encourages viewers to consider what it truly means to face overwhelming odds, not by emphasizing moral lessons, but by highlighting observation, reflection, and personal perspective. The arena, the fighters, and the crowd all fade into a mental frame where the audience can project themselves, analyzing reactions, decisions, and mental composure. Bruce Lee's presence exemplifies controlled skill, patience, and focus, while the fighter's adjustments illustrate adaptability and resilience under pressure. What aspect of mastery resonates most with you? Focus, anticipation, or composure? How might you apply that in your own experiences?